Are you an adventurer looking to take your hunt to the next level? Then you're in the right place. Welcome to East Meets West Hunt with your host, Bo Martonic.
Hey everyone, what's going on? Welcome back to another episode of the East Meets West Hunt podcast. This podcast is brought to you by the University of Elk Hunting. Corey Jacobson and Elk 101 have put together a fully comprehensive course, an online course that has covered everything elk hunting from the planning stages through fitness, gear, elk calling, elk behavior, how to get the elk out of the woods, every single process, whether you're a beginner or you're an elite level elk hunter. And Corey is offering up 20% off his course by using the code EastMeetsWest at checkout. So check that out over at elk101.com. Click on the University of Elk Hunting and check that out. In addition, Heather's Choice has created backcountry meals, and I guess for traveling, hunting, hiking, any sort of outdoor activities, has created these meals that are high in fats and proteins, healthy, gluten-free, dairy-free nutrition option for those that care about what you're putting into your body. I mean, it's said a lot, but whatever you put in is what you're going to get out as far as levels go of performance. So Heather has offered up the listeners here free shipping on any orders over $99 by using the code EastMeetsWest. And if you just wanted to try out a few packaroons or some breakfast or dinner options, and it's under $99, still go over to our website under the partners page and click on the link that we have there. It would definitely help show us some support. And lastly, Maven Optics. So Maven has created a company that, through their direct-to-consumer business model, is able to put out the highest quality optics at half the price of their competitors. Maven's new S2 spotting scope will be with me in my pack and doing some glassing this year in Idaho. I'm going to a little bit more open country, a little bit different environment than I'm used to. Going to rely on the glass a little more. And this small, lightweight, packable spotting scope that weighs only 2 pounds will be definitely with me this year. So check out Maven. And if you're interested in picking up a pair of their binoculars, spotting scopes, or the rifle scopes, you can use the code EastMeetsWest-gift and you get a free gift with any of your orders. So check that out. All right. So as far as news go, got a few updates this week. First and foremost, I will be at the Backcountry Hunters and Anglers Muster on the Mountain this weekend in Pennsylvania. It's kind of like their East Coast rendezvous. There'll be music, beer, food, backcountry Olympics that they're having. I'll have a booth set up there with some apparel, and also I'm going to be doing some sort of not sure exactly how it's going to be structured, but a speaking event on scouting and hunting mountain bucks. So there'll be a bunch going on, doing some podcasts, just a lot of fun to be had there. I'll have the James Baroud rooftop tent on top of my truck on display, which I'll also be sleeping in. So if you come to check it out after dark, be careful if you try to look into it, because I'll probably be up there. So that's coming up this weekend. I believe you had to RSVP already to go to that, and there was like 400 people that RSVP'd, but it's going to be a pretty awesome event. Looking forward to it. So I'll be coming out there this weekend. Last weekend, I decided to do a little bit of snake hunting, so went out for timber rattlesnakes. I talked about it on one of the first podcasts ever released last year when I killed my first rattlesnake that measured 52 inches, big yellow phase. And I've been hunting for a few years. I just never ended up putting a tag on one. I've caught a ton of them. Just they have to be a certain length and be a male in Pennsylvania. So it's kind of funny again, I talked about it, in detail on another podcast, but just to give you a little bit of a background, Pennsylvania is different than most other states. I'm not sure really if any other states have a tag system or they manage venomous snakes like Pennsylvania does. So you buy a venomous snake tag, which now are available over the counter. You don't have to send in for them. You can just go pick it up as long as you have a fishing license. I believe mine cost $31 when I use a credit card. And you can take one male rattlesnake over 42 inches. So basically from the vent to the rattles, or for lack of better terms, from the asshole to the rattles, it has to have at least 21 or more subcaudal scales. So the scales in between there dictate whether it's a male or female, and also be 42 inches or longer. So I went out with a buddy of mine, Alex Hootie Geithner. We went out and caught 8 snakes in like 3 hours. So it was a really good day, and the conditions weren't ideal. We were just in a hot spot and found a bunch of snakes. And while most of them were probably weren't legal as far as the size of them, found one real big one, the last one of the day, and that snake ended up being probably over the allotted length, but it was a little bit as irritated as far as trying to get it into, like, you put it into a plastic tube, and in that plastic tube is you let it kind of basically slither in there, clamp down on the body so it can't back out on you, and that's where you take the measurement and check the scales. Well, this one was getting ready to shed its skin and super irritated, would not at all cooperate to go in the tube, and actually took a lunge at me at one point when I was kind of being a little bit too lax with it, and I just decided to let it go and just kind of move on for the day. So going to go out in a few weeks here with a few buddies. We're going to do an overnight camping trip, try to get some more snakes, take out a bunch of friends that have never been out before, so that'll be fun. I'm really looking forward to that. But I just posted up a bunch of pictures of those snakes today over on Instagram and Facebook there. So check those out. With that being said, I have Cody Rich coming on the podcast. So Cody, if not familiar with him, has the Rich Outdoors podcast, one of the I'd say one of the most popular hunting podcasts out there as far as Western hunting goes and elk hunting. And Cody has a ton of knowledge and information from years of hunting elk, and I was super pumped to be able to get him on here. And I mean, in reality, he, as you'll hear me talk about on the podcast here, he's got the mustache game covered in the West, so I had to kind of cover the gap on the East Coast. But Cody's a great guy, and I think you guys really enjoy this podcast. So check that out, and hopefully I'll see some of you this weekend at Muster on the Mountain. All right, we're live. Cody Rich, what's going on, man?
Oh, not much, man. Just living the dream. It's a nice, beautiful, pouring down rain day in Montana, so I was actually doing some e-scouting.
Yeah, it's actually just about the same here. We had some high winds, and you said you got some hail when we were talking before we started recording here, but we were supposed to get some, but haven't seen any of that yet, luckily.
Dude, it was like 75 degrees, and I was like, it's a little cloudy, and then the next thing I know, it sounds like the roof is going to fall off, because like it dropped from 75 to 45, and it was just like straight spitting hail. So crazy weather today in Bozeman, Montana. Bring an umbrella, maybe a rain jacket.
Yeah. It seems to be the story across the country. And I was at the Total Archery Challenge there in Pennsylvania recently. The people that were coming even from out west in Utah and Montana, Idaho, everyone's like, same story. It's been rain.
Yeah, dude, I saw the pictures and stuff from Pennsylvania. I was like, that's crazy. It was bad weather.
Oh, yeah. We get freaking hammered. My booth blew over at one point, and I got a cheap like pop-up tent, and the canopy started taking off on me. I'm grabbing it, and when I was tearing down, the tent actually blew away. And landed right on top of Sean DeGray. So that was great. Took out the owner, but yeah, man.
Well, the Bridger Bowman guys had a shoot last weekend. So June, 8th, and it snowed that night. So like they woke up to straight snow on all the targets. Snowy day out. It was crazy. I didn't get to go to it, but it's pretty crazy that in June it's still snowing.
Yeah. Yeah, we don't have that here, luckily, but that's nuts. My brother just moved outside of Denver there, and I think it was like 2 weeks ago. They had 6 inches of snow, and I was like, that's crazy for June.
Yeah, no kidding, man. I'm ready for summer. I'm ready for like scouting, ready for hunting. Like, yeah, just ready for not winter, pretty much.
Yeah, I hear you. But so Cody, So if anyone doesn't know who you are, I kind of want you to give a little bit of background and just like basically you were the original mustache podcaster from the West. And, there was a gap in the East Coast, so I had to fill it,
I like it, dude. I like it. We got the Mustache Brothers podcast going on right now. And I was wearing my Rut Stash shirt earlier, by the way. So thank you for that.
Yeah. No problem.
Very fitting. So yeah, my name's Cody Rich. Originally from Oregon, grew up, West Coast hunter, hunting Roosevelts and blacktails. I now live in Bozeman with the rest of the outdoor industry. Actually, once you're in the industry for long enough, it's mandatory that you move to Bozeman, which is not actually true. My wife and I just always wanted to live in Montana, so we decided we'd do it before we got too tied down in Oregon. So we bombed out to Montana with nowhere to live and planted some new roots in a new state, 2017. So loving it here. Even though it snows in June, it's still awesome. And so, yeah, I'm an elk fanatic. I've kind of hunted all over. So interestingly enough, I grew up hunting Roosevelts, which is like you have to call for. And so grew up calling. That's kind of my background, my forte, my bread and butter. I love dark timber and screaming bulls. But you move to Montana, and I've kind of been working on hunting these open country elk, and so it's kind of been a learning curve for me. And I think overall, I'm just obsessed with elk. And I started a podcast back in 2015 just so I could ask more people more questions and dive into it. And I still don't consider myself an expert. I think I've learned a lot over the years of over 350 podcasts now. So, I just consider myself a student, not a teacher for sure. But obsessed with elk, love elk hunting, but that's me in a nutshell.
Yeah, that was a good way of kind of wrapping everything together there. And I guess I've been told if you're serious about being in the outdoor industry, you got to live in Bozeman. So I guess that's fitting. There's so many jokes that go around about that. I'm sure you hear that more times than not. But I just wanted to put it on the record that I had a mustache before I moved to Bozeman. So that's just so everyone knows. Yeah. And I hate the fact that it's correlated with hipsters now too.
I know. Which is funny because I came from Oregon, which is I didn't nowhere near Portland, but it's synonymous with Portland, and there's a lot of hipsters with mustaches in Portland. So
yeah,
not the case. I don't think I'm a hipster.
Yeah,
for sure.
Yeah, it's funny. Like when I did it, I always would grow mustaches for the whitetail rut, and that's like the rut stash. That's where I came up with that, and then so I did it for like 5 years, and then all of a sudden, I ended up starting this brand, East Meets West, with it, and I had the mustache in turkey season, and just the same time I launched the podcast and everything, and I went to Total Archery Challenge and filmed a Prime archery commercial there. And ever since that point, he's the dude with the mustache. No one really knew my name, but I was just the dude with the mustache. So I kind of built it with the brand, and I like it now. My grandpa's got a way bigger, badder ass mustache than I do. One that like goes way down over the bottom lip. And at some point, maybe nice. I'll be cool enough to be able to do that. But
dude, totally. And it's funny you say that because like it does become an identity. Like I swear. So it was winter of 2015. I think so. In winter of 2015, I had a huge beard, and I just got tired of the beard, and I was like, yeah, it's got to go. And it was day before Super Bowl in 2015, and I just shaved off my beard but left the mustache as a joke. And I was like, I'm gonna go to the Super Bowl party and see if anybody notices. So I go to the Super Bowl party, and everyone's like, "Oh my God, what the hell's on your face?" Just as a joke. And the joke's still funny, so I guess I kept it. But the long story is similar. I started my podcast and like just ended up keeping it for whatever reason, and it became my identity. So I couldn't really get rid of it. And then, I think was it this last year, I did shave it off and I felt naked and I was afraid. So I had to grow it back. So I grew it back. But I feel like it's not nearly as big as it was after 3 or 4 years. So I'm like a mustache in training right now.
That's funny. I shaved mine off this January, actually the day after the ATA show, and I get so much people like being like, "Oh, that thing's so ugly on your face," and then when you shave it off, like you look like a 17-year-old kid, and I'm like, "Oh shit, I can't win."
Totally.
But yeah, I grew it back, and I think it's around to stay, So
perfect. Yeah, mine's probably not going to go anywhere for a while. So
yeah, but that's funny. But now that we got the mustache talk out of the way, so the reason that I got you on the podcast here, I used to listen to a hell of a lot more podcasts than I do now. I don't listen to too many, just I think because doing your own, I'm always either recording or editing, and I just don't listen to as many. But there's a few that I still listen to, and yours is one of them that has a ton of really useful knowledge. And I specifically, because I've been obsessed with elk hunting for the last 4 years, and so those are the ones that really resonate with me personally, and also some of the ones that you kind of do that get into the entrepreneurship type talk on it. But you have recently you haven't came out with it as the time of recording this, but by the time this releases you'll have it out. You put together kind of some lessons to, I guess, help people take from the Elk 101 to Elk 201. How are you, I guess, explain that a little bit better than I am.
No worries. So I mean, I'm an entrepreneur. So outside of being an elk fanatic, I'm an entrepreneur. I've been an entrepreneur for, I don't know, 10, 12 years. And, I, as obsessed as I am with learning about elk hunting, I, obsessed over entrepreneurship and like, I didn't go to college. So I kind of just learned everything from books, and I read tons and tons of books. And so I pick up a lot of these lessons from entrepreneurship books and things like that. And I think it's really helped me in my elk hunting career as well. And so, couple that with 350 podcasts or so. And, I get a lot of the same questions and I see a lot of the same problems with people. And so like inherently when you're in this world and you get questions from people and you talk to experts and you're like, okay, I can put these pieces together pretty well. And I wanted to come up with like this, like, cheat sheet, I guess, not cheat sheet, but like mini course. We'll call it a mini course of just how to take it from 101 to 201. If you think about it, it's like, okay, 101 is your entry level, 201, and then 301 is kind of an expert level. And, when you're, the way I see it, this is like very one person's opinion, but 101 person to me is like someone who's just wandering around in the woods hoping to get lucky. A 201 person is someone who is confident that they're going to get their elk every single year. And, if you put 301 out there, it's like someone who can target one elk and get that elk killed, so like that's the level of mastery, right? And so what I'm trying to do is help people go from 101 to 201. And, so I built this mini course on just how to think about things. It's not necessarily like specific tactics. It's very much kind of this broad overview or a way to think about what you're doing. So, a lot of our podcasts and things dive into like certain tactics of like, here's how to scout, or here's how to call, and all these things, which are good. But I think there's a big piece that's missing from this conversation. And to me, it's like how to go about thinking about how and what you're doing. And it really does just boil down to like being efficient and effective. And I think that gets so overlooked and nobody's talking about it. It's like, I look at it from the entrepreneurship world of here's how to be very efficient with or very effective with your time. And so I've kind of made this little mini course, and it's just a 8-part lesson or 8 lessons. You get one a day, and it goes through really how to be efficient and effective in all the pieces to elk hunting to help you be more successful. Now, this 101, 201, and 301 is not necessarily like the day you graduate from one to the other. I still float between them all. Like there's definitely days where I'm still a 101. I would consider myself floating somewhere between 201 and 301. And I think we all do that. We all float. And like some days we're super confident we're going to kill elk every year. Maybe 3 or 4 years you kill an elk every single year, and all of a sudden you start striking out. So I don't think it's like a necessarily like a hard fast rule of this day you're this and that day you're that. But it's basically a kind of a mindset. And you kind of went through the course on a beta run, I guess. I just sent it to a few people like, hey, check this out. What do you think? So I'm actually kind of curious what your thoughts are going through this, and some of the struggles you've had and struggles you've seen as someone who's been hunting for the last couple of years but haven't been able to get it done.
Yeah, so like the first part, the first lesson, if you want to call it that you sent out, the effectiveness and efficiency, that really resonated with me, and I think it will with a lot of the listeners that are, say coming from the east going out west. We only have a certain amount of time to get it done, between, if you're working, you have vacation, you're taking off work. And then you have travel to get out there. Most of us are driving, just from the standpoint of getting the meat of an elk back or whatever. So you got, say, at the least one day, usually 2 days of driving each way on that. And say you got, 5 or 7 days vacation or days to really hunt, 5 to 7 days. That's not a whole lot of time. So if when you're doing that, you need to be able to be on your game and trying to find elk, that entire time. And I think like last year I was out there for 14 days. I was lucky and was able to get some more time off. And, I definitely could tell there were some times I was a little more lax because I knew I had 2 weeks. I'm like, there's no way I don't get it done in 2 weeks. Like, hell, this is, I had that attitude a little bit, and I spent probably an extra day or so in this one area that was all dried up, and the elk weren't where they were the year before. Or the 2 years before that, I hunted this area and always got an elk in these spots, and it just wasn't the sign there. And I just kept like almost trying to create the elk to be there. And like just thinking, they're here somewhere, and they had completely moved out of that area. So after like 4 or 5 days, I picked up and went to a different part of the unit, and then ended up going to a whole nother unit. But I guess what my point of that is, I wasn't thinking as efficiently as I could have been to become effective with it. And just moving, in some of your lessons here, you talk about when you're not looking for one elk or 2 elk, you're looking for a herd of elk, and I think that's a really good point to kind of touch on. I mean, when I was out there, looking, like if I even saw an elk or I saw some sign, I'm like, oh, there's one here, and I was pushing for it. And, you kind of talk about it, and actually, Corey Jacobson kind of talks about it a little bit, and his on the standpoint of he's wanting the bull that wants to play, but almost the kind of the same thing that, you're moving until you find, a herd of elk or whatever. And I thought that was something that was a really good takeaway from the lessons here. And you kind of want to speak a little bit on that topic?
Totally. Yeah, and I totally agree with Corey on this. And this is where I try to stay away in my mini courses. Like, there's a lot of tactics. And to me, I almost was trying to keep it shorter. Like, Corey's course is amazing and it is in-depth. But short of doing an entire course, which has already been done, Corey has it. These are just a few of, like, the concepts I think about. And so when I talk about, like, and I see this as a huge, like, not a huge mistake, but it's a very, very common mistake that people make, is like they're going out west and they want to kill an elk. So they just have to find an elk. But when you're hunting one elk, it's you and that elk against each other. Like, man, you have very little odds of killing that elk. Like, he just has the upper hand tenfold. But if you go into a draw and you find 50 elk, you're like, now it's 1 in 50. Like, your odds are extremely better, you know? So if you're looking, and what tends to happen is, like, these elk, when you understand what they're like, they're all rutting and they're kind of doing the same thing. So you may find one elk on the side of a mountain, but he's looking for the herd too. So, what I've really found is that if you want to kill any elk, like, and I tell a lot of people this in my podcast, like, go hunt the herd bull. And what I mean by that is that you're going to hunt the action. You're looking for the biggest amount of elk that you can, and inherently that's where everyone's going to show up. That's where the party is. And so when you spend your time trying to find that, and you understand that, okay, during the summer, basically cow elk are going to be in their summer pattern, right? And most of the bulls are going to be off doing their thing. Some of the middle age classes are going to be hanging around pretty close. And when you understand that, you're like, okay, now you show up in Colorado, Montana, wherever you're going to hunt, and you're like, okay, I'm finding a little bit of sign. There's definitely an elk here. That's all I need. Well, what you're looking at is an area that one elk is hanging out at, but he's going to go somewhere else because he's looking for those cows. So when you're trying to find a herd of elk, you want to find the biggest population that you can because it gives you the biggest opportunities. And, a lot of times you'll find these places where there's 3 or 4 elk, or 3 or 4 herds of elk kind of in the same area using this, and they're bouncing back and forth. I mean, that's what you truly want, because now you have bulls going from one herd to another, and there's just a lot more opportunities. And I talk about in my sequence is like, it's getting at bats, and that is the name of the game. When like you just want to kill an elk, whether you're even trying to get to 101, you're really just trying to get at bats. You need those experiences, and as you found out, like, you can get into elk a lot, but it takes a number of at bats to really even seal the deal. So now it's like, okay, how do we get more at bats? How do you get into more elk? And kind of what Corey's already told you is like, it's that's kind of the reason a lot of people frown upon, like, hey, I'm going to go in 20 miles, because it really limits you. And so I think it's being efficient and effective. If you really boil it down, being efficient is using your time wisely, but being effective is doing the right thing at the right time. So the differentiator there is like, yeah, I can be really efficient. I could, be hiking my butt off and going, I can hike 4 miles an hour, and I'm getting back there and I'm bouncing around, I'm glassing the perfect times. But if I'm not doing the wrong thing at the wrong time, I'm not being effective with my time. So it's like, in this email or in this lesson, I talk about being effective, but also being efficient, but also being effective and doing the right things at the right time to maximize at-bats. That's all we're trying to do, is get you in front of more elk. At the end of the day, that's what's important.
Yeah, I mean, because you're gonna screw it up. I mean, at least from my perspective, like I was telling you a little bit beforehand, and I've talked about it on the podcast before, but I've screwed up more chances than I'd care to admit, and it's all from not knowing what to do in those situations. I grew up hunting whitetails, and when you go back to talking about finding one elk, and you kind of touch on a little bit, in your mini course here about like, that's kind of the 301 guys say they're going for like the one bull that might be, back in this, super remote basin or whatever it is. And I kind of compare that to whitetails where, for a few years there, I was hunting one specific buck, and there wasn't, he didn't like being around other deer, and it was extremely tough. I wasn't seeing a lot of animals. And then once he, passed on, that I couldn't find him anymore, so I assumed that he was shot in rifle season. I started, hunting, I guess, where more deer were, and where I thought there was a chance of more mature deer that might not have been the biggest one on the mountain, but good ones. And then my success rate, jumped up from that, or at least opportunities did, and I guess I've hunted whitetails long enough that I've been able to capitalize on the opportunities more than I have elk, obviously. But I feel like the same concept applies throughout, each thing, just with different tactics and, the middle pieces there. So
totally. And I mean, like, just the same way as like you could kill like a 180 whitetail, in an area where he's not supposed to be. Like, there's always an anomaly. But I think at the end of the day, when you run it by the numbers, a lot of guys will look at what I do. I spend a lot of time going super deep into the backcountry, finding the most remote I can. And, the thing I'm looking for is different than the thing you're looking for. I'm looking for that place where an elk can grow to 10 years old or 8 years old even. And, I'm looking for the age class. So for me, like, I'm actually staying away from the numbers because inherently it's just not going to happen. They're not going to be in the same place. And if you look at it, like, the farther back you go into the backcountry, and that's a loose term, but the farther back you go into the backcountry, the opportunities are going to be fewer and far between in theory, but they're going to be better quality. So some of the downside of, say, hunting from the pickup or just hiking in and being close to roads and things like that, those elk have probably been messed with before. So it's, like, maybe they'll bump early, maybe they won't. I've got into elk that just as soon as I made a call, they blew out of there. They'd been messed with very recently. So, the quality of those exchanges may go down, but at the end of the day, I could jump on my pickup, drive 5 miles, and hike a half mile into a new area and be on elk within an hour, no problem. And so, like, I'm on multiple occasions. And so the downside to going super deep is that, I get in there and I'm looking for that elk, and I get into a herd elk, right? And I bump that herd elk and it goes into the next drainage. Guess what? I got 5-6 hour hike before I even am close to elk again. And, that's the downside, is like you screw it up and you have a lot, you have to a lot more work. You got to hike out of there and spend a whole day hiking out, or a half day hiking over the next drainage, or, it just takes up so much time and so much energy. And that's why I really want to focus in on, people who, like yourself, you're starting out, you need more at-bats. You need to fail more times. And it's like in entrepreneurship, they always talk about, how do you fail faster? Well, in your case, it's like, how do you fail faster? You need to get within bow range of more elk. So instead of 1 per year, you need to be getting in front of 10 or 20 per year. So then you start to understand when to draw, when not to draw, what the elk's doing, like feeling that out. And that's when you start to have success, is when you've kind of been around those scenarios. Because closing a deal that's the make or break. And there's always going to be somebody who just got lucky and a bull stopped and they shot it. But for most of us, it's the struggle is, man, finding elk's one thing, but getting within bow range, getting a shot opportunity, those are like a whole another level of games. So it's like, you want to be around as many elk as you can so that you can have as many opportunities as you can.
Yeah, it's so funny. Like you said, finding elk is difficult, sometimes, especially, for me, when I was going out there for the first couple times, it was extremely difficult, even going to a new area, finding them. And then once you find them, you're like, yeah, you found them. Well, now it's a whole nother game of, like you said, getting close. And even once you get close, then that's where it really, it kind of defines your success of what you're doing and making the right choices when you are close. And I guess that's where the effectiveness kind of comes into play. And of having those at bats, like I said, I can, and you really resonated with me in the mini course. And you said, if you think about the ones when you first started elk hunting, you think about those ones that got away and what you would do differently, and that runs through my head like constantly. I'm like, man, if I would have known this, or if I would have just done this, everything could have been different. And people would maybe respect when I talk about elk hunting. No, I always say, just no, but disclaimer, I'm not considered whatsoever knowing anything about elk. That's why I bring people on like Cody that can talk a little bit more about it.
Yeah, it's funny because, like, when I started this podcast, I really struggle with being an expert. And I think there's one thing I've learned over the years is that, I look at Corey or, Dan Evans as, experts. These guys have killed more elk than I'll probably ever see in my life. And, I look at them as experts, but there's enough people that look at you as an expert or me as an expert, and I think everyone has their own expert level they're at. And so I'm happy, like, to share my advice, but in no way do I consider myself an expert. I'm merely a student that's kind of like relaying what I'm learning along the way, but hopefully it helps a few people. One question I had, you were talking about like the things falling apart at the last second, and it really makes me think. It's like, I remember so many times, and I think it's good that you think about those things, because I remember so many times in the early years, like, God, if I would have just done this or I just done that, and then you do that, and then the next time it's the opposite, or it changes, and it's like, man, you just feel like you never know what to do. And like, I beat myself up over those mistakes early on, but I think it's just repetition, and having confidence and getting yourself in those situations enough that you're like, okay, like this is how it's done.
Yeah, it's funny. I think of the first elk encounter I had. It was so funny because we walked up, we heard a bugle, and we went running up, and there was this hiking trail right up to this lake, and it was like beautiful, well known. I mean, all these hikers camp there and all this stuff, and like never think that there's elk going to be right there. Well, the bugle was closer than I thought, and he was actually drinking out of the lake that was there, and I think one of the cows seen us and kind of went up over the hill, and we went chasing after it, and he's bugling he was so pissed off at us. My brother was behind me calling and raking a tree, and it's just spitting and sputtering and bugling, but I was chasing it from the bottom, and the thermals obviously were blowing up the hill. And the crazy thing is, I mean, where I hunt in Pennsylvania, it's actually pretty steep, and we deal with thermals all the time. So I knew what thermals, what they were, and I just didn't account for it. So the next encounter I had, it was like 2 days later, or no, it might have been the next year. I was in the middle of the day. There was like a group of like 5 or 6 wallows that were just absolutely destroyed, and there was a north facing slope right next to it, a dark timber. So I was by myself at this point, and I was kind of beat up. I'm like, I'm just going to sit here by this tree, off the side of the wall, because if I sat right next to it, the wind would have been blowing up to where I thought they were bedding. So I stayed about, 75 yards down from it, and I was kind of dozing off, and all of a sudden I heard splashing, and I looked over, and there's a 5x5 just throwing mud all over itself and going nuts, and I cow called, and he comes out like on a string, and all of a sudden I panicked, and I'm like, it looked like he was coming up above me. So I just like got up and just like sprinted, try to get above him. And in reality, he was coming in on a string. And then he was at 12 yards and behind a tree at that point. But if I would have stayed where I was at, I would have got that opportunity. And it's just funny. Like you say, one thing happens so that I do the opposite, and he did the opposite.
Oh, dude, don't worry, that'll just keep happening. So just to make you not feel bad, I'll give you one of my my first mess up ever. So I was 15, and I knew some elk up in this cut or whatever, seen him the night before, and I'm by myself. So I drove myself up to this gate illegally, but I think the statute of limitations is up on that. I'm not sure, but so I drove myself to this gate. I think I skipped school, and
double trouble there.
15, yeah, 15. And I start hiking up this road in the dark, and it's like just cracking daylight. So on my right, there's a gravel road that goes up. And on my right, there's just some big dark timber. And on my left, it's a big clear cut. And I'm thinking that the elk are about 200 yards ahead of me. And I had a Siri call, the old Skiri. And I just stopped, and I just blew 2 hard hyperlip calls. And it's still just dark enough where you can't really see. And a goddamn train came through that clear cut, and I thought I was going to die. Like, it just like snap, pop, and just coming. And I panicked and just hit the ground and like into the first bush that was there. And this 5-point just runs up, and he's standing like 30 yards from me. And I guarantee he could hear my heart beating, because I could hear it heart beating. And I'm like, I'm stuck in this bush, and he just walks, and he's like looking for me. And I'm so screwed, dude. I'm like in the bushes, like they're like in no circumstance whatsoever could I even drawn a bow if I had a shot, but I am in the bushes. And like he goes around to like 12 yards behind me, and I'm too afraid to like move or anything. And so like he is 12 yards from me, and I think I just sat there and panicked. And then pretty soon he got downwind of me and bolted. And that experience, like, as pissed as I was, I don't think I was mad at that moment. I was like, that was the coolest thing ever. And I'm like, yeah, I had no chance of killing that elk whatsoever. But lesson learned.
Yeah, it makes me feel a little better.
In front of the cover, not behind it or in it. Like, don't bury yourself in the middle of bushes.
Yeah, that makes me feel a little bit better is doing that. And it's funny. That was one of the first things I think I did learn, because my first year was when Corey launched the University of Elk Hunting, and I signed up, and he talked about standing in front of objects. And so that, I feel like that was the only thing that I did right, was stand in front of objects, but I still, the setups were terrible and everything else went wrong. But you know how that goes. But
Totally.
I think it's good to talk about those type of stories and things that help people, because if you just look at, whether it's Instagram or something else, social media, it just seems like everyone's just killing shit except for you, and everyone makes mistakes.
Totally. And I think they're required to learn. And I think that's the tough part, like for yourself who has to do so much to go elk hunting, it's not just going out your back door. Man, it's tough, but learning from those mistakes is the only thing you can do. And it's tough. It's tough because you always want to shorten this learning curve. Like, how do I not have to go through 5 years of not killing an elk to kill an elk? And, that's where this course stems from. There's a lot of the same questions I get over and over. And they're not, it's not very specific. I really tried to stay away from, here's the tactic you do. It's more of like, here's how to think about things. Here's, philosophy. And, I built it around like this could work for someone like yourself who comes, 1,000 miles to go elk hunting, or someone who hunts in their backyard, and really tried to stay away from like this specific pieces that are like, okay, here's the tactic you need to use, because so much of that changes. It's like different if I'm elk hunting in Montana versus Western Oregon. So those things change a lot. I do dive into the wind a little bit. I know you talked about that. That's, I think, a huge piece of it for a lot of people coming out west is like this miracle, magical devil that they think the wind is, which sometimes it can, feel like that. It just feels like the wind spites you, just follows you around and blows at your back all the time. But I think, when you have a good concept of how the wind works, that can really help. Man, I screwed that up for years. I think that was probably the mistake that I made the longest. Was it's not just thermals, it's wind, and understanding how wind works in the mountains and how wind and topography played in a role. Because, I think so many of us, we're taught like, oh yeah, thermals, it goes up and down, which is not like, that's a very broad statement.
Yeah, in a perfect case scenario.
There's yeah, like a ridge that has no effect from other mountain or topography or features, yes, might do that for like an hour a day. And it's like, I think we get taught that thing that, oh, thermals, they go up and down. And that's like, the people just take that to heart, and then they get in these situations, and one thing that I've learned is that, man, I truly believe elk tend to find spots that the thermals won't act to. So they're choosing, no different than a trout sits in a back eddy, and he's waiting for that food to be there. Was the back eddy there and then the trout, in front of the trout, or did the trout choose that spot? And so I think in the same capacity, like I look at a lot of spots and I'll think about this before I make a move. So you've probably experienced this, you find a elk and you get all jazzed up. Oh, I got to get down there and do this thing. But you never think about the wind. You're like, okay, wind's doing this. I'm going to, it's blowing here, but what is it doing there? And I think, man, a lot of people miss that one, like just because it's doing it here, what does that mean? And how does the topography lay out to what it could be doing there? And I think that's a huge thing that gets missed. And I say that because I've screwed that up more times than probably most of your listeners. I'm like a gung ho, and I get down in there and the wind swirls, and it, or the wind's going the wrong way when I get there, and blow it out. So, man, wind can be your friend. It can be the devil. It's a tough thing to master in the mountains. I will tell you that.
Yeah, and one thing that you touched on that I had never heard anybody else talk about, but I've learned it from hunting whitetails in Pennsylvania. Like, so in the Appalachian region, we have a lot of steep ridges and with some little points and spurs coming off those, and so the whitetails seem to bed, just over the edge of these like hills out in the points. Seems like the mature bucks always get the furthest spot out, and they're over on the edge where the wind's swirling. So they have the dominant wind that's coming to their back normally. They can see down over and also get some thermals that are coming up. But in addition to that, depending on the wind speed, you can get the wind tunnel effect, where the winds, the dominant wind is coming over the ridge, and then it kind of just sweeps under like a wave does. And that was one of the biggest learning curves for me with whitetails, is that understanding that wind tunnel. And it applies to elk too, because they're going to bed in those places like that. Like, so if I was setting up, I started hunting like for whitetails tree stands. I started hunting really close to known buck beds, and I can only hunt like those areas, or I have to be careful on how I set up based on the wind speed. Because if it's super windy and that tunnel comes in effect, you might have the wind perfect, and you just hit your puffer or whatever you want to call it, your smoke thing there for wind detection, and it'll go and it sounds like it's good, but you're not seeing what it does out further. And that's when I started carrying milkweed, because it travels further, and you can see that whole entire process of it. But there's so many different things that, with the wind, and you dive, really deep, not really deep, but you dive pretty deep into that and give a good understanding without losing people, in the one whole section you have that's all about understanding the wind.
Totally. And like, I think, thermals are like such a just base layer piece. And, it sounds like you've thought about this, or you'll understand it pretty well as far as whitetails. And it's like, you would never try to hunt that whitetail when he's laying in his bed. Like, he has that spot nailed for a reason. And I think too many people, they hear a bugle and they think they can just absolutely call in any elk. And it's just not the case. And so I think a part of being effective is choosing the timing, right? Like, you're going to choose the timing on that buck. You're not going to just go in there and try to kill him on his bed. You're not going to go up to his bed and try to rattle him over to you. It wouldn't work. So it's like, okay, how do I be effective? And so like, where's he going? And like, what's going to happen? What are the probabilities of, certain events happening in the next, hour, 4 hours, 10 hours? And, when you look at that, you're like, okay, here's where he's vulnerable. And so like, just overthinking it and saying, okay, well, if that elk, I've seen a lot of big bulls, that'll bed in chutes, like avalanche chutes and things like that. So they'll almost bed their cows down, and they'll go bed in an avalanche chute, because like an avalanche chute is like on a certain ridge, when you have the wind blowing past it, it just creates a swirl and an updraft and all these things. And so like they're basically keeping track of everything. And just like, your whitetail that beds on that ridge, I've seen elk do that a lot, to where it's like they just have the wind perfect, and you're not going to win. You're not going to win that game if you try. And with elk, it's like you got 30 noses, not just one. So, choosing your timing is huge to that. And like, just anticipating, and not that you can completely anticipate the wind unless you completely understand like low pressure, high pressure systems, and you can have a way to control that, and topography. And like, there's a lot of variables there that you can't keep track of. And I think the best takeaway is like, how am I thinking about the wind before I make an action? Or what could the wind possibly doing before I take action and screw this up? Because as you know, you just don't get that many opportunities at elk. They'll figure you out real quick.
So this might be a completely off the wall question, but I want to hear if it relates at all to elk. So like, with whitetails, I believe that if a buck has a certain, point or ridge that he likes to bed on, and in the Appalachian Mountains, they don't have like one bed they lay in, but say they have a few preferred areas, and you do bump it, it gets away. A lot of people are like, I don't do that. I don't like to bump the deer, and I don't like to bump them either. But if they got away and, unharmed, unscathed, then their bedding spot did its job. And they'll typically come back to that area and bed there again. If you bump them 2-3 times, it might be different. Does that apply to elk at all? Or do they not really have one spot that they bed, really?
It depends on the elk you're talking about. So I think there are elk that act like that. Prairie elks tend to act somewhat like that. I just don't think elk are as habitual as whitetail deer are. They tend to be a lot more nomadic, or they at least move in cycles, bigger cycles. So, they have much broader home bases, but at the same time, they could just leave for no reason. It's kind of like herding cats. Like, it's really hard. Like, there's a lot of whitetail guys like, oh, just pattern them and that's how you do it. Man, find me a guy that's patterned elk pretty well, and then I might change my mind. But sometimes prairie elk can be like, there's the guys that kill big bulls and they pattern them. There's guys that kill Roosevelts and they pattern them. Early season, I think they're far more patternable. I think they become less patternable, no different than like trying to pattern a whitetail in the peak of rut. There's a lot of variables and things that can change his mind. So, I don't think so as far as they'll go. I don't know that they're, that habitual to have certain beds. Man, I've had so many times where I just think I absolutely have a herd of elk figured out, and then they just disappear or go to the next ridge for no apparent reason whatsoever. So they're just tough in that way, but sometimes yes, sometimes no. There's just too many answers to that question, like it's too many variables.
No, I didn't think, it didn't seem right, but I was like, I'd never heard that question kind of asked. So I figured, hey, we'll see if there's any, a relationship there, but, I guess I'll
totally. Guys do it with mule deer. I know there's some great hunters that'll bump a mule deer before season just to figure out where he goes.
Yeah.
That's crazy to me, but I think mule deer more than elk for sure.
Okay, that makes sense. But yeah, it's like, some of those questions like that, it's, people, if you're thinking in the whitetail mindset, I'm sure some things apply, but elk are a completely different animal. But as far as like the wind,
totally.
They're trying to survive, so they're going to use it to their advantage, no matter what species it is.
Totally. And like, you have to understand that like some elk will go 15 miles to take a drink of water and then turn around and come back. Like, it's on such a bigger scale than we can wrap our head around that, like I have buddies that watch elk all summer and then they just disappear. No idea where they went, for all they know, it's not within 5 miles. But that's not unrealistic for an elk just to be like, okay, peace, I'm going, 5-10 miles this way.
Yeah.
And like, good luck, when you get to that 10-15 mile range, you're like, man, good luck. He just checked out on you.
Yeah. And like you said, there's so many variables about where they live. I've hunted primarily dark timber areas in the high country, Colorado. And now I'm going to Idaho this year, and it's a mixture of open country and dark timber. So it's going to be completely different for me. And I'm kind of excited about, that, just to do something a little bit different. But I'm sure, each area is a little bit, I didn't do really any glassing, in Colorado. I did glass them up in the high country before, but I think in Idaho this year, I'm going to rely, a lot more on optics, at least in the mornings and the evenings, and just try to, it's just like you said, there's no one answer to that. And at least that's what I'm gathering from you and everyone else that I've, talked to.
Totally. So what would you say is your biggest mistake throughout your elk hunting career? Or biggest struggle, maybe?
I'd say the biggest struggle would have to do with closing the deal. Honestly, it's getting my mind right and knowing when to shoot and when not to. I think I was a little bit too timid when it came to that. Like, I felt like I was more aggressive than some do on their first few trips, but I feel like I was too timid when it came to the point where I had, opportunities. I'm waiting for that perfect, shot. And obviously, it needs to be an ethical shot, but you also got to take the advantages or the opportunities that you get. And I think that's one of the things I've screwed up more than not, was that piece of actually closing the deal.
No, totally. And for a long time, and there's a lesson in the mini course that talks about sealing the deal. And, for a long time, I was that way. I would be like, man, I need to be more aggressive. And then I'd be too aggressive and I'd bump something. Guys, like, God, okay, less aggressive. And then you wouldn't get it done. Or like just the shot wouldn't happen. It would never materialize. And so you go back and forth on that. And it's like so hard to nail down like what to do at the right time. And I do tend to lean on not like forcing the shot. It seems like I'm forcing it into a thing, but like forcing the move to get the shot. So, I don't know how many times it's been like just out of sight or just can't quite get an open shot to the vitals, and I just have to move. And it's like, I take a couple steps left or right, or maybe run up 10 feet when he's not looking or something like that. And like, man, I've killed a lot of elk by like really just forcing the shot. Like I gotta move and like just run up 10 feet, or step out, or, bugle like when I think I shouldn't. And that really made the deal. And sometimes it doesn't work, but sometimes, I think more often than not it does. And, I think you talk to a lot of great elk hunters, and it's like, 9 times out of 10, it's about making the shot come to you and not just waiting for the perfect shot to materialize.
Yeah, no, that's I think, like you said, I think that's my biggest weakness. I think I have a ton of weaknesses, but like from an actual me coming home with elk meat and having a successful hunt from that standpoint of filling a tag, what ultimately led to me not filling a tag was those last moments. And like I said, when you can go back and I can replay it in my mind, and I have, it's crazy. And then when you think you're going to get that exact opportunity again, it changes it up. So you got,
Totally.
just being able to execute in that moment. I think it comes down for me to the confidence thing too. Like it's funny because like I felt like I threw out some of my knowledge when it comes to whitetails. Like I'm an opportunist guy when it comes to shots on whitetails. And again, I don't want it to sound like, I'm just taking whatever shot, it comes at you, but like I'll make it happen, whether that's, squeezing it in between a couple trees that I need to when the vitals show, or I'm able to, if I'm on the ground, I'll shoot whitetails frontal and a whole bunch of other different kind of things that, you're always waiting for that perfect opportunity that doesn't usually happen. But what I'm getting at is I seem to be more confident, I think, from experience with whitetails. And when it comes to elk, I just really have lacked in that category. So I think that's definitely a big thing that I'm working on here personally.
No, and I think one of my biggest pieces of advice would be to draw before you think you need to. And this is specifically like when an elk's coming in. If you're calling an elk, obviously if you're just spot and stock, this doesn't apply, more for calling. But if you're calling, like, draw before you need to. Almost every time, like, they're gonna catch you if you try to draw, and if you can see the elk and you draw, he's gonna catch you. Like, he's looking for movement. Especially for you guys that are gonna be calling solo. I do a lot of solo hunting, and I've got caught more times trying to draw my bow back, or they get to range. I'm like, okay, cool. Now I need to make the shot happen, and then you go draw, and it's like maybe they jump and they stop 10 yards away, but now they're like full alert, and the opportunity to take a step in one way or the other is over. Like, you can't, like, if he thinks you're there or knows you're there, stepping in any direction is done. Like, it's you pretty much luck of the draw when he spooks. So, I always draw before I think I need to. And, I even practice holding back, just so I'm confident that I can hold it for a minute. But a minute in the woods is a long damn time. And, when they're coming in, if it looks like you're about to get a shot or even remotely think you're going to get a shot, man, draw.
Yeah. It's funny. I mean, like, and everyone, kind of exaggerates that, including myself. I was drawing back for 2 minutes. Really? Like, let's put a timer on that and hold back for 2 minutes and see what happens.
Yeah.
It feels like it. It feels like an hour, but, so Cody, with you, what about, like, what was, like, your biggest mistake or something you needed to work on for a while to be consistently successful? And just the other part of that is, like, what you have, a ton of podcasts, and I'm sure people are reaching out, or does that kind of fall in line with what other people are saying?
Yeah, that's a good question. And we kind of touched on a lot of the little pieces that have, I've screwed up over the years. I think one of the mistakes, or one of the struggles I had, and I probably still have this today, it's consistency. So when you're gonna do something, it's good to be consistent. So, like, I remember multiple trips to Idaho when I was younger, and it would be like, oh, that was too aggressive, I'll be less aggressive, and then that wouldn't work, and then it'd be too aggressive the next time, and then so I'd go back and forth, where I think if you find that middle ground and I'm consistently about the same aggressiveness, it's gonna work at least one of the times. So instead of trying to change up your routine or what you do every single time, you're likely that's not going to be the case. Whereas if you just do the exact same thing every time, the same aggression level, the same, whatever, pushing harder, whatever you want to call it, that's going to line up. And I think you find success that way. So, I think a lot of people just bounce back and forth of being aggressive, being not aggressive, and maybe like couple that with knowledge of elk behavior in a way that's like just knowing what, like if you watch a dog, you can tell it's aggressive or it's non-aggressive, and just animal behavior in general. And like being able to look at an elk and say, okay, is this going to fall apart in the next 12 seconds, or is it not going to fall apart in the next 12 seconds? And, that just comes from spending a lot of time. But I think those things have kind of really helped me be consistent. Even this last year, I spent a lot of time chasing big bulls and trying to not necessarily not call. If I was given the right opportunity, I would have called, but like just being almost too patient. So this last year I was probably too patient for a long time trying to kill big bulls. Got on some really great bulls and ended up being just too patient, or just letting that situation slip out of my hands. And when I went back to like my old school, screaming bugles and being aggressive, it ended up getting it done. And, it's kind of cool to be like, back to the bread and butter, and that's one thing I struggle with, is hunting open country and being patient and waiting for the right moves. And, if people come in and, hunting pressure is always this thing, you can never get away from it. So, I still have my struggles with that, is being aggressive versus not being aggressive. But I think at the end of the day, like that's kind of the thing, that finding that right middle ground has helped me be successful over the years.
Okay. And does that kind of fall in line with some of your listeners, any of the things that they've reached out to you with questions or struggles or anything like that?
For sure. I think a lot of the questions you get are people just are centered around more like finding elk. I think a lot of people still struggle with like getting the opportunities, finding the elk, things like that. I get a lot of those questions, probably less so than the sealing the deal questions.
Okay. Yeah, I wasn't sure. I mean, and just from the feedback that I get, a lot of that comes around the same thing with the scouting portion, and even like with some of the podcasts I did with Corey that had to do with that portion, were like, those were the ones where I was getting the most feedback from and people responding to and, wanting to know more. Cause I mean, especially if you don't live around them, I mean, that's a difficult thing to do,
No, it's funny because like, your tactic, there's different tactics for killing elk that are going to do better if you have time to scout and if you don't. Like for me, glassing elk and spawn stock can work, but at the same time, if you don't have a clue, it's going to be really hard to get on elk in an efficient time frame. And so like Corey style, where he's just looking for the bull that wants to play, like that, he doesn't really need to scout an area because he knows he can cover a lot of ground and call it a lot of elk. He's going to find one that wants to play, and he doesn't really need to. And I think that's pretty important versus, picking a spot. If you're coming from the East Coast and you just pick a spot, man, there's a lot of variables there. You need to be mobile. Like, and I cover this in the course too, is like, man, this is a big part of it. You have to be mobile. You have to cover a lot of ground to find the right elk, to find the right population of elk. And I think, man, too many people, whether it's coming from California to Idaho or from the East Coast or whatever, like anytime you're traveling that far and you can't scout, you have to change your tactics a little. You can't just rely on going deep and, getting into one herd of elk. Like I think it's, if you can't scout, you need to be mobile. That's, I think, the best way to sum it up. Yeah.
No, I'd agree with that, and I'd laughed the first year when I backpacked into this area, and I'd like backpack hunting. I think it's fun, but I backpacked in this specific spot. I realized that there was more people going deep than anything, and they were passing up elk. So I ended up hunting back towards camp, and there was like the people that were around like the mile around the trailhead, and then there was the people that were 7 or 6 to 12 miles back in. And then there was like a nice gap there a couple miles from the road is where I got into all my elk. And it was funny to kind of to see that. And then so this last year, the first the first 6-7 days of the hunt, I truck camped and just hit different areas like that and pockets, and it was great because I had a lighter pack on. I was able to be mobile. I didn't have to go back and pack up camp where my spike camp was, and everything else. So there's, like you said, there's a bunch of different ways of doing it, but it's just interesting to see, as far as getting those opportunities.
No, it's funny because one of the last years I hunted Oregon, I went to a completely new area, kind of place I wanted to hunt, and I get to this trailhead, and there's 33 cars at this trailhead, and a lot of trucks and horse trailers. So I had, don't think I brought horses. I get to this trailhead, and there's 33 cars, and I'm like, oh my God, this is insane. And I start hunting, and within, not around there, but just off the road, different road systems and stuff, I was getting into elk consistently every single day, never saw another human. And I was just laughing because I'm like, man, everyone is doing the same damn thing. Like, they're all just going to trailheads, see how far they can go. And I didn't see any dead elk from anybody else. And like, I was into elk every single day, driving around, hunting half mile, less than a mile off the road most of the time.
That's funny. And I remember the one time we were driving down the road, and there was like a heavy trailhead from hikers and hunters, and there was an elk standing there right next to the road. And in the middle of the day, I was like, it's just funny that totally. They do exactly what you don't think they're supposed to do sometimes.
No, and I think that's a big piece of it is like the dynamic of elk changes throughout season, and it's another important thing to think about is like if I say I was traveling to Pennsylvania to hunt elk, right? Like, would that be an entirely different scenario? Say I was trying to Colorado, right? Never been there. I get there. I almost want to see what happens throughout the season because that's going to tell me where the elk are. So I'm looking for where the people aren't. Like, the number of elk in the unit isn't changing. It's like, okay, I have a pretty good idea that there's going to be a lot of people in this area and this area. And when I'm mobile, it gives me the ability to kind of fill out the traffic, so to speak, or feel out the hunting pressure and be like, okay, where's the voids? How do I find the voids that people aren't? More so than like just looking at the map, like, okay, well, here's going to be a void or here's going to be a void. It's always hard to tell, but you drive around enough and you see cars parked in certain places or, trailheads, certain trailheads packed. And it's like, okay, I've seen a lot of people in this area. And so that's where I think I excel is just being able to find the void throughout the season. And that can be tough if you have a real short season, but yeah, I've done that in Idaho multiple times. Just felt like, what the hell? Like, this is a circus. Like, there's just people everywhere. And man, I'll just beat my head and like, okay, what can I do different? What are they missing? What are they not seeing? And really like just understanding and like starting to think about and look at my map. It's like back and forth. I look at the map, like, okay, I've seen a lot of people here and here. They're probably hunting here. They're hunting this. I saw a 4-wheeler over there. Like, where's the gap? Where's the gap? Because the elk, it's not that they disappeared. They just find the holes where people aren't. And they're huntable. They're usually not very far from a road. Yeah.
No, that's a definitely said a good point. And honestly, you said that you did that a lot in Idaho. If you want to just send me your waypoints to get, rid of that learning curve for me, that's definitely welcomed. So appreciate it, buddy.
Dude, and advice to you is like, I think so many people like, so Jaden is this guy that works for me, and he's about the same level you are. He's been hunting his whole life. He understands he's good, but he just hasn't got that done yet with archery elk. So him and I talk a lot about this, and I'm like, he'll show me spots like it's deep, and like, I mean, everyone is thinking deep. Everyone in the world, I shouldn't even say this on podcast, but everyone in the world is thinking like getting away from people. Like, you have to look at microterrain, and when you start you look at Google Earth or you look at Onyx, everything looks tiny. It's very small. But what you don't realize is it doesn't take a whole lot of a hole to hide elk. Like, it really doesn't. And I think that's what a lot of people miss. And they all know they missed it because they look at Google Earth and they're like, oh, I'm going to climb this hill. And then they get there and they're like, oh, that's a 4,000-foot mountain. And so it's like, man, Google is very deceiving. Well, Google is deceiving the other way too. So if there's a spot that elk can hide in, start marking those spots that you found elk before and realize how small those those little cubbies are that they can hide in and no one finds them, And so I think Google as a scale is really bad for a lot of things because like we look at it and we look at these giant basins and these big things and like we expect it to be there. But the reality is like, man, it doesn't take a whole lot to hide a herd elk, which is kind of a crazy statement, but it really doesn't.
Yeah, it's funny. Google Earth is a bitch. I mean, when I first looked out there, my first trip, me and my brother, my cousin were like, all right, there's all these, we're going to go up to here. We're going to glass from there. We're going to bugle from here. And we'll do this on day 2. And like, we had it all mapped out. We had the ultimate, plan to kill an elk. Then we got out there, we're like, holy shit, like that's huge. Like, that's gonna take
2 days to climb.
Yeah, that's exactly right. But it seemed like when you blow the elk out, they can get up over there as fast as you thought you could. But it's funny. And when you were kind of joking there at first when you said like you coming to Pennsylvania to hunt elk. So I live in kind of the middle of the elk herd here, and they're a decent amount different than out west. And just everything's everything's just different about it. It's funny. What's that?
Oh no, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, whenever I feel bad about my trip out west, I come back here and I go in and I bugle in about 5 or 6 bulls, and I feel okay.
Yeah, no kidding. And it's like 400-inch bulls.
Yeah, it's stupid.
Elk, they're freaking insane.
Yeah, they're stupid. Like it's. Yeah, the one time I was out there I didn't have camo on, nothing. I was just out just trying to bugle in some just to see him and hear him. And I called in this one bull. He was a young bull, but he was still like a 7x6. And I thought the thing was going to run me over. I'm yelling at it like, get the hell away from me, And that's when you get closer to some of the towns, they act more. They don't act like elk do, I guess. But when you get into some of the if you want to call it backcountry in Pennsylvania, at least back in some of the big forests and stuff, they act a little bit more like elk. It's just the terrain's different, vegetation is different, so it's tough to kind of correlate some of those things. And there's no pressure.
Yeah, exactly. Someday I'll draw that tag. Probably not.
Hey, this year they changed it. I'm doing an article right now about they changed the seasons. They actually have an archery season now in Pennsylvania. Which oh
really?
Yeah, so there's 3 seasons. There's a archery season, there's a general season which they've had for the last 15 years, and then they have a late January antlerless season. And all 3 seasons you can apply for, and they're all on a separate point system. So you start at 0 for archery, everyone's on 0, and you keep your points for the general rifle tag or any weapon tag, I guess. So it's going to be interesting. The dates are like from September 14th to 28th, which is, you draw that tag, it could be freaking killer in the rut. So you might want to apply June 17th here. It's when you can start buying licenses and start applying. So
isn't it with Pennsylvania? It's just it's like a lottery.
Yeah, it's 100% lottery, except for the what your bonus points or preference points, or however they call them. It basically just gives you one more name in the hat is how that works. But so actually Onyx came out with this Hunt Central that they have now on their website. That goes through like some of the draw odds, and they actually have Pennsylvania elk on there, and the percent your chance of drawing is like, I think it's because they don't go any lower, but it's like 0.01%. And even if you have the max points, which I think my dad has like 1 or 2 less than the max points, and you're still at like 0.05 or 0.06%, something crazy for the rifle tag. But the archery one now might be a little bit better. I probably shouldn't even talk about it.
Fair enough. I think, I put in for a couple different years. I don't know. Yeah, probably 2 years. So I got 2 bonus points. So I should be like up there in the draw odds.
Yeah. Well, if you end up drawing, you know who to call to help do some scouting for you from afar.
Totally. Totally. Because it's probably one of those hunts you need to scout a lot.
Yeah. Yep. Oh, you definitely. But so anyways, Cody, is there anything else that you kind of wanted to cover here that wanted people to dive into your mini course or any other, kind of tidbits? I mean, you could talk all day on elk hunting, but just any last words with that?
Yeah. No, I mean, I'd love you guys' feedback. I mean, we kind of created this mini course just based on like a lot of the stuff that I've learned. So sign up. It's 100% free. It's at the Rich Outdoors /201. And yeah, there'll be a link on the top of the website too to check it out. But it's just an email, and it'll send you 1 email a day. It's got some homework in there, not necessary, but they're basically just more content on the matter. So, I think there's on the efficiency and effectiveness, my buddy James and Nash and I have done an entire podcast on that. So just a little bit more information, but again, it's 100% free. Check it out. If you guys want to leave me some feedback or critique or anything, I would love it. Appreciate it. But yeah, thanks so much for having me on. And if you got any questions, hit me up anytime.
Awesome. So, and Cody, just one last thing. Where can you find, just give some of the social handles and the podcast and everything where people can find that? Oh,
totally. So the podcast is The Rich Outdoors. It's wherever you find your regular podcast. You found this one. And also on social, it's The Rich Outdoors as well. Instagram, Facebook. I don't really do Twitter, so I'm not there, but pretty much I think I have one. I don't know much about it though. Yeah. So The Rich Outdoors pretty much everywhere, and the podcast, wherever you find it. But yeah, appreciate it. Thank you so much, man.
Yeah. Cody, thanks for coming on, man. We'll have to talk again soon.
For sure, buddy. And good luck. Curious how you do this year in Idaho.
All right, thanks, man. I'll be definitely letting you know. You'll be hearing my screams from Montana.
Perfect, man. All right, buddy.
All right, see you, dude.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode of East Meets West Hunt with your host, Bo Martonic. For more great content and to stay up to date, visit eastmeetswesthunt.com, Facebook at East Meets West Outdoors, and Instagram at East Meets West Hunt. If you enjoyed today's episode, please review and subscribe, and we'll catch you next time.